Face to Face with Shalan Benedict.
Hello there, a very good evening and welcome to another edition of Face to Face, where of course we keep you up to date on the latest of developments from here at home and across the globe. One subject that has been making it to the headlines in the past few months actually is the reciprocal tariffs imposed on Sri Lanka by, not only Sri Lanka, across the world by the United States. Now, why this is specifically important to Sri Lanka is because this comes at a time when Sri Lanka is facing an economic crisis and we have a balance of payments crisis. Therefore, the US is one of the biggest importers of Sri Lankan goods. So all of this interconnected, interwoven, and will ultimately affect the economy of Sri Lanka, which will in turn affect the lives of each and every one of us. Now, to untangle this very complex web that includes economics, politics, geopolitics, and so much more, we've got with us today Dhanusha Pathirana. He is an economist. Mr. Pathirana, a very good evening and welcome to the show.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
So let's start off with I think our viewers might be having some sort of an idea about the reciprocal tariffs under the Trump administration, and of course how the entire Trump administration is functioning at the moment. Quite unorthodox, one could easily spot and say, because this is not how the world is used to dealing with a global superpower, that is the United States. We've seen the Trump administration break several boundaries, certain limits, international safeguards, best practices, and move into a completely different realm. But as far as the Trump tariffs are concerned, we see different states reacting differently. You have countries like Sri Lanka, countries like maybe the Maldives, who do not have that much of a bargaining power as opposed to the United States taking a little bit more diplomatic approach. And then you have countries like China, Russia, the European Union, even Mexico, threatening reciprocal tariffs on the US, despite Donald Trump's threats to impose even higher tariffs if they do impose retaliatory tariffs on the United States. So could you give us a bit of a background into where this tariff war, if I would say, that the United States has launched on the entire world is at right now, at this moment?
Yeah, I think first of all, we need to understand that we are looking at very loud symptoms of a declining empire.
Okay.
Trying to sort of cling on to whatever it can. So, and in the process, it's not even its enemies, it's even trying to bring down its own allies, so to speak. So now, I mean, if we go back to the past, instances where this has happened earlier also, especially a few years before the Second World War, we have seen an eruption of trade war and also a currency war in the early 1930s, where even higher tariffs are imposed by countries like United States on its trading partners. So we call these beggar thy neighbor policies, where you're basically trying to export your own unemployment. But you know, more than that, we have more specific issues that are specific to the current situation, where right now United States is playing the role of the global currency, which carries with it its own issues. So when you're having that's what we call the Triffin dilemma. When you're having a strong currency which is used to global trading, you are bound to run trade deficits. Otherwise, your currency, there is no other way to access your currency in trades that are happening in the rest of the world. So you have to run some sort of a deficit in order to finance trades that are happening.
In essence, one of the biggest exports of the United States is their own currency.
Yes, you can say that. So, so what happens there is, while that's a dilemma when your currency is strengthening itself and you're playing the role of the global currency, it also carries with it its future decline, because you need to run these deficits, which then again impact your economic stability going forward. And that's what we are seeing now, and it also has an impact on your industrial process, where an appreciating currency despite industrial jobs coming down has a very high tendency for your production structure to become very unstable, because the businesses will not be able to plan ahead, and because people have interpreted this issue as low wage jobs or low wage economies in Asia or parts in outside the Western Europe have been absorbing all these jobs that are leaving United States and Western Europe. But on the contrary, we see capital have been moving into Western Europe also. So you can't say the jobs are actually a low wage. So what we see is that compared to even other developed countries, see an outflow of this industrial work from the United States, which has created the lack of employment security and all that, which actually feeds into this type of beggar thy neighbor policies through their governments. So
Mr. Pathirana, what you're saying is that the United States is justified in resorting to such a measure because they have now been pushed to a wall because of the reasons that you explained. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I'm not saying these are, by normal standards of democracy, we can justify this. It's just that we tend to interpret this as sort of, insane type of policies which comes through a person who is out of, not functioning, desperation, and not within bounds of rationality, as if he's or the Trump administration is not really acting according to, principles that are being upheld. But the issue is there are certain economic contradictions that the United States is currently facing. For instance, now its debt has tripled over the past 15 years. This is the government debt. Now, what we saw up to 2006 or 7 was that the United States economy was has been boosted through private sector credit. Mostly, it was obviously a debt bubble which blew up in 2007, 8, 9, the credit or financial meltdown. And after that, the aggregate demand in the system has been boosted through pumping state or increasing state borrowings. So, for instance, in 2008 or 7, I forget the exact year, the total national debt of United States was around $10 trillion. This is a government debt. Right now, it's more than 36 trillion. So, the debt has completely gone through the roof, and it is not in a position to contain it also. That's why we are saying now, in fact, the economic hegemony which the United States enjoyed over the post-war years after the Second World War is coming to an end. It's in a slow decline. So, but it's up to the United States to decide whether they are going to, go out in a bang or just decline slowly. But right now, what they're saying is the first option. They're not taking this lightly. So they are trying to drag the entire world with them. So that's another issue. For instance, now even if you take the conflict which just erupted and now sort of just simmering in the Middle East. Now even there we saw, like, compared to the very militaristic approach which the United States had in the early 2000s, where they were determined to go to war and continue being in war for longer periods. We saw, like, there was a token bombing of Iranian nuclear facilities, as they call it, and then just pulled out of it because their economic situation does not warrant them to or allow them to go for this long drawn out militaristic measures, despite the fact that they are the world's by far the strongest military. So right now their economic situation is declining, whereas there is a huge gap between their military might and the economic might. So it in a way it's good because it
keeps them at bay.
Keeps them at bay. So so why I'm saying this now, with the imposition of these significant tariffs, it's not only giving a message, look, we are still the dominant economy in the world, they are also trying to address their fiscal deficit and the debt issue, because I think after the post-war there was not a year where I can't be exactly certain about this, there was not a time where the United States bonds were downgraded by the rating agencies.
Well, for the first time it has now been downgraded.
It has been downgraded a few months ago. So this gives out a message, United States dollar is no longer in a position to play the world's reserve currency. And we are seeing the US dollar depreciating about 10 to 15% against the euro. But we have seen much worse times. So for instance, in 2007-8, it depreciated even more. But still, there is a significant outflow from the United States sovereign bonds market. So this means it is also pressurized to keep the strength of the dollar intact. So these tariffs can be also utilized to strengthen the fiscal capacity to repay the debt. So, for instance, now...
Mr. Pathirana, just before we move on, I'm confused. Yeah. Does the Trump administration want to depreciate the dollar, or do they want to strengthen the dollar? Because according to what you said, being the global reserve currency and having such a strong currency, it tends to become a bad thing if it is, extended over a long period of time with, the job market, the jobs moving out to other countries that offer cheaper labor. So, because we've had several conversations on this with other economists as well, and I still don't seem to really quite understand what the logic is here as to what the United States is trying to accomplish. There are those who say that he's trying to crash the dollar, but then are you saying that he's trying to kind of appreciate the dollar, keep it strong? What's happening there?
No, I think they are trying to strike a balance between these two
extremes.
Yes, okay. Extremes, or yes, I mean, on one hand, they would want the dollar to be a global player. For them to remain a global player, obviously the strength of the dollar should maintain. If you have having a depreciating currency, that means the rest of the world will not be feeling confident in keeping their reserves in dollars with the Federal Reserve. So at the same time, that is what we call the dilemma, the Triffin dilemma, because if you want to keep a particular country's currency as the world's reserve currency, then yes, you have to have a very strong currency. But again, it will backfire in the long run, because an appreciating currency, a currency's movement that is sort of decoupled with what is happening in the real economy, will again in the long run have a negative impact on your, especially the tradable sector, or what we call the manufacturing sector. And that's what we have seen in the United States. We saw that with the British sterling pound also in a different way, so to speak. That's why we cannot reduce this issue to simply, cheap labor in Asia stealing US jobs. Then you can apply that to Western Europe also, or Japan, or wherever other developed centers in the world. But they are also having certain issues with their economies and jobs and so on, but not to the extent of United States. Now we are seeing deportations, the mass deportations. Right now, the reports that are coming out saying Trump administration is saying they have already deported around more than 150,000 illegal immigrants. These are the people that make up the labor force of the United States, and cheap labor, mind you, because they don't have any legal rights. These are so-called illegal immigrants. They keep the production costs low. Now they want to bring in manufacturing and sending out their cheap labor. But I mean, this is illegal. You can't, it's like slave labor. The conditions of these immigrant workers, they might be better off compared to our workers, but comparatively in the United States, they are treated very badly. So that is what I'm saying. They have a massive job decline in quality jobs because of the deindustrialization which we saw specifically after the mid-90s. You can trace it up to that point. So, if I add another point, now before the collapse of the Soviet Union, United States dollar only accounted for something like 40 to 45% of the world foreign exchange transactions. By now, it is facilitating over 80%. So, earlier what happened was that while it maintaining the global superpower position, while it had a very a strong rivalry, it didn't have to play the world reserve currency role to the extent that they're playing now. So then, because one could ask, then why didn't United States face these issues earlier? Obviously, because the demand for the US dollar was not this great because of the political global situation which we had before the 90s. So now what we are seeing here is that roughly about $3.5 trillion worth of world trade is subjected to over about on average 30% taxes. World trade is about 24 trillion. So out of that 3.3 trillion is a huge amount. So subjecting that to a massive tariff, say something like on average 30%, would mean that at least you are looking at a decline of about 1% of the global GDP if this comes into effect in the long run. So that will have a huge impact on employment, especially on countries like us. And more than employment, we'll be having other balance of payments problems going forward, because these tariffs are not uniform. So investments are bound to fly out into destinations which have lower tariffs. So moving on, I would also like to say, now there is again another perception. Would the internal price level of the United States move up with this
cost of living?
And wouldn't the same population which wanted some radical policies out of this administration would again protest against these tariffs, because their living costs will move up. But strangely, if we look into how exactly these tariffs are imposed, the tariffs are imposed on FOB prices or CIF prices, which means the cost, insurance and freight. So after that, there is a markup of about 7 to 8 times. So that is to say, the retail price and the CIF price has a massive gap. So if you say impose 30% tax on the CIF price, that is comparatively not much when you compare that with the retail prices. So for instance, if a garment exporter here gets $5 per piece, that is sold at around $35 or somewhere around that range. So the 30% tax will be imposed on the $5 price. So then your price will go up to about $7 or something like that, let's say $6.50. But what is the impact on the retail price? Retail price will not move up so much, because anyway these retailers have so much of power, they will shift to destinations which has lower tariffs. Say for instance, even now companies in Sri Lanka looking at countries like Egypt and even India. So that would have a really significant impact on Sri Lanka, because now we have the assigned rate for us is 30%. So there's a huge gap between say countries like Vietnam is getting 20%, and if India is projected to have a rate below 20%, and Egypt is also below 20%. So these regions are being favored by the industrialists here who are foreign and local. So we might see especially what the companies have said is that they are willing to move out, shift their manufacturing or facilities which were supplying the US market.
So quite an interesting point you've come to, Mr. Pathirana, with regard to the effects that this reciprocal tariffs will have on Sri Lanka and how that will play out in the global arena. We'll get into that and much more after a short commercial break. Don't go anywhere. You're watching
Face to Face with Shalan Benedict.
Hello there, welcome back. You're watching Face to Face. If you're joining us just now, we're in discussion with Dhanusha Pathirana, an economist, regarding a very important development in the global arena, the reciprocal tariffs that have been imposed on countries around the world. And we discussed the global impact, why the United States is doing this, what's the logic behind it, how will it play out. We're now focusing our attention specifically on how this will impact Sri Lanka. Now, Mr. Pathirana, you said that 30% is the tariff rate that has been given to Sri Lanka. Initially, it was set at 44% when the first tariffs were announced. Now we've gotten a letter saying that it's at 30%. However, yesterday we had news coming in that a team from Sri Lanka is set to travel to the United States within the next 2 weeks or so to discuss any further concessions or any further reductions that we may have. However, you see that Sri Lanka is taking a very diplomatic approach to this matter, not going to announce reciprocal tariffs because, of course, that doesn't really play out. It doesn't make sense as far as the scale and the bargaining power of the United States and Sri Lanka goes. But just to get a little bit of understanding of how these discussions go now, when the tariffs were initially announced, commentators on CNN expressed surprise in the fact that Sri Lanka was slapped with 44% of reciprocal tariffs, because they said that the United States, of course, purchases apparels and many other items from Sri Lanka. However, Sri Lanka does not have a market for the kind of goods that are exported by the United States, which includes maybe weaponry, modern technology, different other items. So when these discussions progress, what is the basis on which these discussions are taking place? And when the final 30% tariff was announced, now I think Donald Trump announced the fact that he wants to strike up trade deals. Is there a trade deal that is going to be signed between Sri Lanka and the United States? What's really happening there? I don't think the general public has too much clarity on this matter because, of course, it's quite a technical area.
Yeah, well, what the government said about this issue was that they are willing to purchase more wheat, corn, and also petroleum products from the United States. But of course, if that makes any logical sense, the market would have already captured that opportunity if there is any price advantage in going into purchasing wheat and corn and also crude, say petroleum products from the United States. And if there's any chance, markets are very much capable of capturing those and exploiting those. But if, let's say, the government is saying we are going to make a decision to go and purchase it, it will be obviously have to be above the current market prices. And what the government team led by, I think, Dr. Surya Perumal was saying, they haven't made anything conclusive with regards to what they are going to do in exchange of this reduction. But he also said that they are in discussions of increasing. Would you believe that they are even discussing setting up manufacturing facilities in United States? So
for Sri Lankan goods?
No, Sri Lankans going and starting manufacturing
Sri Lankan
companies starting manufacturing facilities in the United States in exchange of reducing tariffs. But there is a big issue with this approach. Yes, in the discussions they might have considered a reduction in the tariffs, but I think these type of reductions we have seen happening in most areas in the world, except for few, like for instance for Europe, they have slapped a 30% tariff, whereas earlier it was 20%. So there is again, we see disconnection rising between United States and Europe when it comes to the economic matters, whereas politically they seems a bit more closer. But whereas BRICS, in terms of its economic integration and also political integration, they seems to be growing day by day. Whereas earlier alliances which were there in the Western Europe or the former traditional powers seems to be loosening up. So in that context, I'm saying what Sri Lanka would benefit from, how they could benefit from this is, look, if even in this context, if certain amount of garments manufacturing jobs are to disappear, that means there will be a rising unemployment in the country. So, and also the markets, I would say this even within a perfectly normal political situations, markets are not capable of delivering what we call a transformative effect on countries like us, third world countries, where the markets on its own are, there is a belief that markets on its own are capable of dragging out third world countries out of poverty. But that has not happened anywhere. State has played a crucial role. So in this type of a situation, role of the state becomes even more critical. So what I think we need to look into is that what all other economists have been also saying, that our production structure is extremely rudimentary and that it doesn't have the transformative capacity as far as we are seeing it now, because we have been concentrating on garments and tea, rubber, coconut. And we have seen this trend right throughout our post-independence period. So markets have not been able to expand out of this this framework. So like what we see in other East Asian countries, state has to play a more active role in the process of industrialization, especially in this type of a situation. So now if I say a state-led industrialization solution would require capital goods. Now those type of capital goods then can be imported from a country like United States. Because United States is one of the world's main machine tool producing economies, even now. So it is not practical to say, for instance, we'll go and import petroleum products from it, because now what we're using here, petroleum, is also a low grade, some Euro 2 or Euro 3 standard, whereas they are producing something like Euro 6 or Euro 7. So, so the production capacities and the demand requirements don't match. So, and it won't be a viable solution. So, but they have understood one thing, the government, that is to say, what the United States wants. What United States wants nothing else other than purchasing from them. In that, if that is realistic according to their calculations, they will consider reducing tariffs. Now they have said, okay, we'll buy wheat, corn and so on and so forth. But I mean, realistically, these won't make sense going forward. So we need to come up with a state-led plan to, you know, face these type of issues, and within that plan, how to so increase imports from the United States, which should in the future allow them to bring down the tariffs. So, for instance, right now, government has allocated 1.3 trillion in terms of investments. The previous budget allocated something like 800 billion. So, they've almost increased this by a huge margin. But onto what are they spending this money? It's the same old infrastructure-led model which got us into this mess in the first place. They are planning to expand even more into it. So, but is our investment structure, especially the government public investments, are aimed at the current economic issues. I think there is a massive gap between the infrastructure projects, or rather the public investments portfolio, and the grave economic issues which we are about to face in the coming few months. So these things need to be rationalized and realigned. so that you are using your capital optimally, other than just dumping it into these unproductive infrastructure projects, or rather their productivity or their capability to address the current issues are very much less. That's one thing. And of course, so that is to say, shall I give some examples now where we can work on now? Even now, today there's a newspaper article saying that the pharmaceutical manufacturers in Sri Lanka are demanding for the government to extend its purchasing agreements, which this government has not extended. And the pharmaceutical industry has has expanded during the last 10 years, but it still only supplies something like 20% of the market. So there is great capacity to expand, which the slack in labor or the unemployed labor that could be reabsorbed into by expanding other spheres which are more viable. So in order to expand these type of industries, you will need capital goods. You might not be able to produce on your own internally, which can be sourced from countries like United States. So you are having an integral plan. So what I am saying is, in order to address this tariff issue, that should be placed within a broader economic plan to address the key economic structural barriers which we are already facing. It needs to be integrated, not like these ad hoc plans. Okay, I'll buy corn from you, wheat from you, which might not bear fruit in the long run or even the short run, because the costs are much higher.
But then, Mr. Pathirana, now there is no finality to these tariffs.
Yeah.
I mean, one day the United States says, you know, this is the tariff, then they change it, then they say, you know, if you impose retaliatory tariffs, we'll increase it more. Then they come out and say, okay, no, we had a good discussion, so I'm going to reduce it. There is no predictability in these matters. I mean, I believe these tariffs were initially imposed maybe a month, 2 months ago.
In April.
In April, yes. So it's been postponed. There was a 90-day moratorium. Now they say the 1st of August. Even the European Union is just they too have extended their reciprocal tariffs on the United States, the imposition thereof, to early August. So there is no finality. Is the United States really serious about these discussions in the kind of, you know, intentions that they have, or is it ad hoc from their end as well? Is it planned from their end? Because you're saying we need to plan, we need to go with a solid plan. But then, you know, if one party goes in with a solid plan and the other party, who has more of the bargaining power and who is the bigger player in the discussions, does not have a solid plan, well, let alone for Sri Lanka, but for the entire world, because that's who they're really discussing with, the entire world. So do you think the United States has a clear plan on how they want to proceed?
Yeah, I mean, it's very uncertain, as you say, how they would go about this issue in the future. But regardless of the fact that United States policy is extremely uncertain, it will have, we have to be ready for the repercussions. So that's why Sri Lanka needs to have a overall economic plan where these type of uncertainties can be absorbed and used as an advantage to transform from the current state of backwardness. So that's why I'm saying, even if, let's say, they impose the tariffs, or even if they delay the tariffs, whatever said and done, there will be business decisions made within the market. So taking all those uncertainties into consideration, businesses have already made their decisions to, some of them, to shift into destinations which they feel are safe. So when these type of very grave policy transformations are on the cards, decisions are made beforehand, especially within the markets. So governments like us, or countries like us, who have absolutely no say in these policy matters, would only need to have more solid plans in order to face.
That's all we can do.
That's all we can do, because whether the United States have a clear policy or whether they are uncertain about how to go about this is not something countries like us can control. So we have to have the best policy and structure in place to face and also to address the current the economic drawbacks which we are facing, because I mean, if you look at the state of the living standards in the country, even the World Bank is saying our poverty rates are close to 25%, which is alarming. And also there's a recent ILO labor report which came out on the wages situation, and also last year there was a wages situation report which put out by the Japanese external trade organization. It's a government organization. They are saying in Asia, this is by the report came out early or late 2023, Asia's lowest wages are in Sri Lanka in manufacturing sector, not in India or Bangladesh after the collapse of the currency and so on. So the situation of especially the working people are in a very bad place, because the cost of living is so high despite inflation rates coming down. The normal price level is still extremely high compared to the very low incomes we are making. So all these things need to be taken into account. Now, for instance, what I could also suggest is that something like the OPEC, where the OPEC, the Middle Eastern countries are very successful in keeping their output prices at a favorable level for them. Similarly, countries like us, especially these say garment manufacturing destinations like the South Asian region, should think about forming charters like that and collectively bargain, not for probably prices, because compared to oil or petroleum products, which is more homogeneous, there is so much of heterogeneity in terms of or differentiation in terms of products in things like garments. They should come up with a minimum wage for the region, because wages don't fluctuate overnight. It is very easy to set compared to the what we call the purchasing power parity rates that are already calculated. Now, for instance, why maybe I should also say this, why the United States have imposed so high tariffs on garments, that probably because United States had a history of garments industry. It was only after the Second World War that entire thing disappeared, and especially New York was a hub of even right now. United States is having a garment industry larger than that of Sri Lanka. Its garments exports is about 22 billion, because there are smaller retail shops that actually outsource demand from more larger brands, and they produce it. And there is and if you compare the wages, it's like, there's so huge gap, but they're doing the same doing the same work. I mean, in terms of real wages, not taking into account the higher price level in United States. You call the purchasing power parity. You can convert that into purchasing power exchange rates, and then compare the wage rates. After that, there is about 6 to 7 times gap between for the same work done. So on that basis, you can argue for a minimum wage for the region, for these type of, because you are doing the same work.
But then is it the companies that need to take the first step, or the governments?
Government should take the first step. The initial approach should be coming from the governments, and then of course it should take the corporate sector with them. So, so because we have examples of that, not with the wages, but with prices, then prices are more difficult to contain. Wages are easy to set. Once they are set, I mean, I'm not saying we can get up to the United States wage level overnight, but there could be a long-term process of having a particular ratio compared to the purchasing power parity exchange rates. So, in the long run, you're seeing an upward movement in real wages, which will increase the inflow of capital to the region. So that's why countries like us are highly reliant on debt, because now our debt problem will also exacerbate within this situation, because if say the manufacturing outlets are moving out, then we are seeing a reduction in inflow of foreign exchange, and we need to pay even according to IMF projections, we have having to pay 4.5% of GDP in terms of foreign debt this year. This is only the government. So our GDP is what, something like 100 billion. 4.5% of that is over $4 billion. That's a lot, because our exports, goods exports is something like 12 to 13 billion. So which means it's over 30% of goods exports. If you take all your remittances and net services, that will come up to roughly still over 20%, because all that would add up to something like 24 billion. So even World Bank says a country which has a debt, what you call debt servicing ratio of over 15% is highly vulnerable. That is to say, your entire foreign exchange earnings as a or debt repayments as a ratio of your total foreign exchange earnings. If it exceeds 15%, you are in a very vulnerable situation. We are already at 20%. So then if we are to face this type of a issue going forward, then we need to be mindful of how to balance our foreign exchange position as well as your employment position. So that's why I'm saying government needs to have a very strong industrial plan for this, and within that context you can address the issue of importing from the United States, which will benefit the discussions going forward in terms of reducing prices. And also we need to have a not just plan on our own, but have regional cooperation for what to have a more, this is a pressing issue for the region, because there is what we call discriminatory wages, and that's what is actually feeding the higher living standards in the Western Europe, not just the productivity level. What is being said is, oh my God, the stock of capital, the quality of stock of capital is so much greater, productivity is so much higher, and that's why their living standards are greater. That's only one side of the picture. There is a transfer of values. The studies have been done on this very recently. There is a huge transfer of values due to the unequal wage rates for the same amount of work done. Say for instance, let's take another example. What do you think about a nurse or a doctor working in, let's say, a hospital in United Kingdom, and a doctor and nurse working right here? The payment gap is extremely massive, but probably the work done here is much more. It's much more because these guys put in extra hours of work, and their work intensity might be even more, but they are paid extremely low. So there is so this feed not just drags down our living standard, it also feeds into our debt problem, because you need to have a flow of capital to maintain full employment level. You call it, without debt you need a flow of capital, stock of you can call it as a full employment stock of capital that is required to maintain work for everybody who is in working age, let's say. So but because the adequate amount of capital is not flowing, because what we know is our economies are what we call labor intensive. That means capital will flow through mostly not through profits but wages. Right? So then if your wage rates are at depressed level, artificially depressed, set on colonial standards a long time back, and these practices are now still continuing, are made into the market structure. They've been continuing. So in that case you are lacking the amount of capital required to maintain employment, and therefore you are impelled to exert or keep on borrowing externally. And then obviously you will also face a situation where you won't be having the necessary capital to repay them also. So the whole global financial structure and the trade structure is made in a way that debt problems are built into it, and because of this especially it's bringing from the inequality in wage rates. So we have a responsibility to address this issue regionally. You can't do it alone, of course. So if governments can cooperate regionally to form something like an OPEC bloc in terms of exports from the third world, this can transform or at least bring some bargaining power to the region, which has been battered right throughout. Especially, I mean, this just goes back to the colonial periods. So, and also one major thing is that there is a massive issue of capital flowing out of our trade account, Shehan. Because now Sri Lanka is a signatory to Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, and there is a clause under 16.4 that the countries who are signatory for this to this understanding should work against the outflow of, or the flow, or what they call the illicit flows. Illicit flows happen in different ways, but one of the major ways is the manipulation of trade. Now, I have looked into numbers. These numbers are something like 15% of our total trade. It's happening through exports. Say, for instance, exporters record lower price figures or volumes so that they can keep their foreign exchange earnings in terms of US dollars or euros. So this needs to be addressed, because we see, if we have a series of data for the last 12 years where there is a spike in this whenever there is a significant depreciation of the currency. So that means these are cyclical related. So if the businesses feel the currency is getting weaker, they would want to keep much more in terms of the foreign currency. So this has to be addressed, because we are about to face a foreign currency shortage, or a situation where foreign currency would be lacking compared to what we are seeing now.
Especially with the imposition of the tariffs from the United States, and of course the uncertainty in the global economy. Of course, Mr. Pathirana quite elaborately explained, and these matters are all very interwoven. One depends on the other. And like you said quite rightly, it's very important that the Sri Lankan government has a plan moving forward. Despite what other countries do, all that Sri Lankans and of course the Sri Lankan government can do is to try their best to maneuver these situations to the benefit of Sri Lanka. This may have happened in the past, it may have not happened in the past. The way it happened may not be up to the expectations of Sri Lankans, but despite what happened in the past, all we can do now is work together for a better future. Thank you very much, Mr. Pathirana, for joining us on our program today. We could, of course, discuss these matters for much longer, but unfortunately, our time on Face to Face has come to an end. Thank you very much to our viewers out there for tuning in to another episode. Until we meet again, take care and God bless.
Newsfirst, Face to Face with Shalan Benedict.